Everybody, we're going to go ahead and get started. I think several people will be coming in a little bit late. We just want to make sure that we start on time and end on time. And welcome. Tonight, I'm going to go over the agenda with you up above. And I'm going to do a lot less talking tonight. Brett and Josh have volunteered to do a lot of the presenting in terms of presenting the K-8 Communities Listening and Learning Sessions report to you. And then we're going to turn it over to Jonah and Greg to kind of go over next steps, kind of summary, executive summary of where we are. And then we will close out the meeting at 8:30. So come on in, just getting started. So the agenda is up here if you want to take a look up there. We're going to start off with what you've probably been waiting to hear about, and that is what our process was for the findings report and exactly what inferences do we draw from that. I just want to say that, you know, it's been an incredible journey. 7 months ago, I told this committee that I would take on answering that one question around consolidation, which turned into asking the question of what do our And we're going to give you plenty of time to read the report also in silence. So we've allocated about a half an hour for that as well. After Josh and Brett present to you what the process looked like. And then after that, we'll move into sort of more technical things of where we are right now in our second to last meeting and what to expect in the last meeting in January. Having said that, I want to go ahead and turn it over to Brett and Josh, who Brett, of course, has been with us on the entire journey since this Long Range Facilities Planning Committee was started, and was with me during the entire 7-month process of the listening sessions with each of our K communities. And Josh attended several of the listening sessions. Also has been a longtime member of this committee, as you know, and so I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to the two of you.
Thanks, Scott.
You're welcome.
Thanks, everybody. We're going to start out. We were thinking through how to approach this just because there's a lot of stuff. But to go back a little bit, talk about the process of how we got here, lay out our discussions about the K-8 work group, and then just give you an example of what one of those looked like. And Josh is going to kind of chime in on different things that happened. And then give you time to read it, just because, and I'll be referencing a few different pages in the report, but just give you time to about 30 minutes to skim through it, look at it, and just get a good sense of all the feedback from each one of the schools, which was a great experience. And obviously the main goal is we can't go through point by point. That's why I want to give you time to look at it, but just to give a sense of the process and a couple of the big takeaways. But then we want to look at some kind of refreshers too. So one of the depressing things a little bit in terms of the time has been when I look back at the time frame that we have up here back to 2017, I think some of us have been involved in every single one of these things. And not depressing in the terms that it wasn't good work. It's just looking back going, wow, we've been involved in this process for a long time in different forms. And so I only put this up here to just highlight a couple of the things that many of us have been involved with, back to the enrollment forecast and work group of 2017 and 18, when the first recommendation was made to form a long-range facilities committee. And also out of that group came the idea of restructuring the K-5s. And that went into the strategic visioning process, and then the 5-year plan, and a couple things that we've referenced many times in this committee, the buildings assessment by BBL Architects in 2019, and then the Nelson report, where we, as part of that survey, that phone survey that happened, and maybe some of us, including me, quibbled with some of the questions and the timing. There was still some good information that came out of that we've talked about and used. And then the educational adequacy meetings that happen in all the buildings, where we took a close look and talked to staff about what their needs were in each one of the buildings, including the high school. And then right up to the beginning of the K-8 work group process from last June to right now. So I only highlight those just to say, even up to this point, there's been so much good work that has been done. It's been hard, especially with COVID in the middle of that, but we've tackled a lot of things and had a lot of good conversations. So a couple things that we'll talk about is why the process, the main question, but then some ancillary questions too that we wanted to answer. The question of how best do we go about getting that input, and then what did it actually look like. And so as you guys know, whenever you get a group together and we start talking about buildings and budgets and long-range stuff and facilities, especially with the configuration of our district, which is incredibly unique, the topic of consolidation is going to come up because we're looking at size of buildings and enrollment and dollars and cents and all of that. And so that question kept coming up in this group from a place of just wanting to solve problems for the future. But it did seem to get to the point where even the question was asked, have we ever really asked the K-8s what they think about that, about consolidation or reconfiguration or even closure and all those things. So we decided to take a pause and actually invest a lot of time and effort into answering that question. And so I think, honestly, doing this process, it was one of the most time-consuming things I've been involved in, but one of the most enjoyable, in the sense that when we were doing it, just hearing from each distinct community how they feel and what they want, and concerns and criticisms, suggestions, everything under the sun, it was pretty amazing. I know Colin had suggested in one of the previous meetings that we need to do similar stuff in town, and I think he's right on that. Not with maybe the exact same question, and maybe the big question of what do you want your future to look like. And I agree, because I think that just letting people kind of tell us their concerns, but then turn the page and focus on what do you want your future to look like, what just was a simple but amazing process. So obviously the main question that we wanted to talk about out of this group was consolidation and getting that addressed. But we didn't want to box it into just that, because if you go out just with one question, I mean, mainly you're going to get some comments about just that question. So we wanted to open it up a little bit more, and that's where the idea of taking criticism, taking concerns, but then turning the page and saying, okay, what do you want your future to look like? And part of that was the consolidation question. But we recognized early on, and I think this was a good decision in terms of, I'm not sure who made it, but in our discussions, that instead of just going out and doing it the way we think we should, to gather together a group of people to ask them, okay, we want to go out to the K-8 communities and ask these questions. How should we do it most effectively? And that's really the impetus behind forming that K-8 work group, is not asking the questions we think or doing it the way we think, but asking them, how do we ask those questions most effectively? And so that was really the impetus behind the formation of that group. And so that meeting in June, and just a couple things about that, even just the idea of going to every K-8 we were coming into it thinking, for efficiency's sake, that we would maybe have 3 or 4 meetings, combine a couple K-8s together, and we could distinguish between the K-8s, have them write down where they're from or something. But it was unanimous in that K-8 work group that we need to go to every single one, because every single one is different enough in terms of the concerns that they have and what they want their future to look like, that we need to take the time to do it. And that alone was worth taking the time to have that K-8 work group. Because you can see when you go through the report, there's veins of similarities that run through all the schools, but they all have their own distinct personality. And from being at every single one of those, you could see that, and you could feel that. And so that work group was super valuable just for that, for that one thing. But it was also really valuable in terms of just talking about the approach that we should use and having those people go out and get good attendance at each one of those meetings. So, Josh, do you have anything to say about that part?
No, not necessarily. No, I mean, I've got my own, some ideas, but yeah, I'll wait.
And so out of that, we set up a pretty basic structure that we implemented mostly the same at each one of the places that we went to, and I just pulled up an example right there. Just a little bit of information from us at the beginning, and then 2 major sections, which was, what are you concerned about? And it could, when we said it could be anything. It could be local stuff, national stuff, public education in general, specific things about your school, whatever. And then partway through, we switched it to the question of what do you want your future to look like? And then we just wrapped it up at the end with some things that we heard. Every meeting we'd meet afterwards, and one of the things we added right away was Steve talking about the bond, because once we got into, people would make comments, and then there was a clear need of explaining bond stuff before, because then we could have a better conversation about it. So we tweaked it a little bit, but it mainly stayed the same throughout the whole thing. If the conversation was kind of going some different directions, we gave more time at the front end or the back end, but for the most part, this is how it was. But even things like providing cards for feedback and adding heaters because it was getting cold, I mean, we tried to just adjust as we went along. And then you guys have probably seen this schedule before, but just our couple meetings, go to the 7 K-8s, and then we met last week as a final K-8 work group. And then you guys are going to read through a bunch of the key inferences in just a second in the reports, but I wanted to talk about the turnout too. Obviously this is a qualitative affair. It's not, you know, a survey. It's not quantitative. There's not, you know, scientific hard data with everybody who was there and who they represented and all of that. But it was, I think, a really, really effective qualitative analysis of each school. And one of the things with the turnout is we had a lot of people there, and sometimes what some people don't understand is that even in the K-8s, you'll have, you know, even if 40 people showed up to Evergreen, those 40 people could represent 100% of the school because they have 3, 4, or 5 kids in the school. I saw that at Victor Point. Victor Point had really good turnout, 120 about, and almost 200 kids. But I mean, for me, if I come, I represent 3 kids in the school. And so the percent of kids represented in each school was extremely high. And in Prattam, there were more people there than there were kids in the school. And it was really close with Evergreen, and there was just great turnout all around. One of the things Josh and I even talked about today was, and he can comment on this real quick, but the number of positive comments in the midst of hard comments too, like real things that we need to address and real concerns, were so many positive comments about their school and their community. I haven't been in that many public meetings where people were crying in a good way, like just crying about talking to the teachers that are in the meeting about how much they mean to them, and over and over and over again. And you could just feel the attachment to the community. And it's represented pretty well in the report. It's obviously we couldn't put everything in there, but just so many positive comments across the board. But I know you had something about that.
Looking back at all the meetings, because it does get a little bit blurry for us as a group how long this process has taken. This subject kept coming up and up again, and I got to really, if I look back and if I'm being clear, I think it was Tom who was pressing it, Colin, and myself of just going to go ask. And we had originally had ideas of maybe we'll go to a church or this or that, and I think this, and then Scott, you know, you took it on and made it to be something different. And by accepting all the different ideas that we have in the group, it turned out to be something that, and this is my opinion, probably the most beneficial thing that's probably happened in the school district in a very long time, because people felt listened to, they felt respected, and they thought their voices could be heard. And when you want to pass a bond, or you want to try to bring people together, you got to give them a platform to talk and speak, and we did that. And I thought we got a lot of great information. It was very clear in these listening sessions that these schools do see themselves as kind of individual communities, and that's something that we have to work on, I think, as a school district, to bring these people together to think of themselves as a community. Now, I have an interesting story because I went to all the in-town schools. My parents went to rural schools. And then my daughter now goes to a rural school. And I could not wait to come back to this community. I didn't come back to Silver Falls School District to send my daughter to Victor Point. I wanted to get back to Silverton. And this weekend, when we had this basketball jamboree and a Christmas thing, I mean, what an awesome thing to have the whole community come together. Middle school, all the other K-8s, and everybody selling stuff, to how important these schools are for the community. I do want to emphasize how positive people were in these comments. Now, there were some negative ones, and we you know, I'm sure the admin is going to take it and look at all those stuff, but people love this place, as I think we all do. When we're talking about the K-8s, there's something that popped up quite a bit that we need to address, I think, and that is they want more input into the staffing choices that are made at some of the schools, or why they're, now I don't know if they're allowed to or not, but that's something the admin will probably address. Something else that was brought up quite a few times was volunteer policies and getting into the schools or out of the schools. Now granted, this doesn't go to passing the bond per se, but it is a part of it. By us listening and maybe solving these problems, it helps people to get invested into this community. There was something that happened the last K-8 group that we had, and I know that some of the other people in the group will get to speak tonight on it. Multiple times people were talking about pulling their kids out of the school district. And the people that they were influencers inside their individual schools. And they said by this process, almost alone, and then getting to know Scott and some of the other admin face to face, said they're staying. That means a lot. And seeing some of the board members out there too. I think the Ks a lot of times just felt forgotten. They did not feel forgotten by this. And I think that this is going to go leaps and bounds and miles to building this community. And I cannot wait to see how it's going to go for the in-town schools in the spring, because I heard we've committed to do that, which is necessary if we're going to treat everybody fairly and equally, to hear what they have to say too. Then maybe we can get this done. So it was an awesome thing to be a part of. I left every night feeling better and better about our school district, and I think I'm really, really looking forward to see what we can kind of do in this group, going to the school board and the meeting we can do tonight, and see what we can do to bring this district unity back together. And that's all I got.
Yeah, thanks, Josh. And when you get this report, it's page 26 and 27 are the inferences and recommendations that were made based on all of this. And there's a bunch of really practical stuff, really good stuff. Obviously, the biggest question that we had set out to do from the beginning was about consolidation. With the exception of some comments at Central Howell, and I think one Evergreen, I mean, it was overwhelmingly that people did not want to consolidate or close their school. I don't know if that is surprising to us, but it was pretty clear. The thing that I was surprised about, to be honest, was the amount of times I talked to, and this is very anecdotal, and this was just from me talking to people afterwards mainly, some comments to everybody, was to me, there was a more positive reaction to the building of the middle school than I had expected. I thought there would be more of a natural, like, no, don't do that. I mean, a couple people expressed the idea of being afraid of a super middle school with everybody there. But there was a lot of support that people told me about. I would be willing to financially support a new middle school if we can keep our K-8 school. And I was surprised at how much I heard that at every K-8 school. And so that gives me, you know, obviously I'm playing my cards here about what I would go for with a bond, but that gives me a little bit of hope that if we do this process in a really thoughtful way, that we could achieve a win for both. I don't know exactly how we do that, but that was one. Even though the consolidation thing was very strong, they don't want their schools consolidated. I didn't hear the negative reaction to a new middle school that I thought I was going to hear more of.
I got one thing on that.
Yeah.
At Central, how, you know, we did ask that question of consolidation. They were the only one. I want to be very clear. They did not say yes, they wanted it, and no, they didn't. There was, tell us more. Probably, and this is just, again, my guess, about 30% were like, we're interested about what that might look like. That doesn't mean that we should go forward. I'm just saying these people are not closed-minded is my point. And when I say these people, the people from that school.
Yeah.
So it means that there can be open dialogue.
Yeah. And from the very beginning, and what I told each K-8 when I said my piece was that it was my hope that, I mean, we all know this community. Like, nothing is going to happen in this community with facilities unless we have some trust. And the debate then is, how do we get that trust to be built in order to do something? Mm-hmm. And I know we all have different views about exactly what to do, but I don't think we can have any debate about we can't do anything without trust. And this process, I think, we're taking a step in the right direction. Now we just have to keep building on that in order to accomplish some things together. And it's my hope, like Josh, going through the in-town schools and living out in the Victor Point area, but then being the principal of the middle school, that if we just keep kind of trying to trust each other a little bit more and work through it together, that we can accomplish something together. And I felt like this whole process was a step in the right direction for that, for sure. So, all that being said, I mean, we could go point by point. I could go point by point, but I know you probably, well, I know you don't want to have me read through the whole thing. So we wanted to give you guys time to read through it, and then at the end of that, we're going to have the people who are involved with the process. So, and I know not everybody's here, but Eliza, Wally, Aaron, Kurt, Tom, and Josh. At the end, so these are the people that are on this committee, but were involved in the K-8 process too. Just give some comments about the process and some of the things from here, and before we hand it over to Jonah to keep us going. So
I do have a side note on that. So I went to 4 of these myself. You're going to read through this thing, and there's going to say a lot of comments. Debbie did a lot of work of trying to take all the notes down, and Jerry, who did a phenomenal job of facilitating these meetings. He really opens up the dialogue for people to speak. This is almost darn near perfect for what I heard and the comments that I saw. I was going through my notes, and they're in this. So you could read this, and you got a really good feel what happened there if you weren't there. So
yeah. Okay.
So 30 minutes, Brett.
30 minutes.
Correct. We have a timer up here, so that we'll set on the next slide, and so people have time to kind of gauge the time to
Yep.
read through this. Okay. And Brett,
I didn't know what sound that timer was going to make, so I got off of it. So I know that probably wasn't enough time to go through everything in a detailed way, but hopefully enough to go through the inferences at least, and just get an idea of the different schools, and I don't know if you had time to look at any of the anything in the different appendix. I was going to reference some things, but there's some slideshows in there about what we did in the K-8 process, and then a slideshow. I think we picked Victor Point as the slideshow for the listening session, and those are good, just representative examples of how we did that process. So hopefully that gives you some good information. So we're going to end this part, and then I'm going to hand it off to Jonah with the people who are involved in both this and the K-8. Maybe Josh has already talked a little bit, so maybe I'll save him for the end. But Steve, did you have something?
I'm sorry, Lisa should have been on that list. Sorry, you were there. You were at the last work group meeting, right?
Does that mean she gets to go first?
Yes.
Wherever she wants to go.
Whenever she wants.
Sorry.
So I don't care whatever order people want to go in that are up there, plus Lisa. Just share some of your thoughts about what you saw in the process, maybe it connecting to the report or not, but just some of your comments about what you saw and how you thought it went.
I'll start. I was a part of the work group, and I also attended 3 of the listening sessions at Butte Creek, Central Howell, and Silvercrest. And can you all hear me all right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So anyhow, I was impressed to see this idea that each community school really has its own community. I definitely noticed that that's true. I personally am hoping to help build district unity, and so I was really there to try to understand where the commonalities and the differences between the needs of my family attends the K-8 Butte Creek, so, and my son is now here at the high school, and I felt like some things that I know to be true for building development at Butte Creek has been volunteerism. I helped make sure that the playground would be installed. I found the amazing folding chairs we have there. I fundraised and ran the PTT for 4 years. So I know that people are willing to put in a lot of energy at those schools, and I also can see that there can be great results. And so I think one of my takeaways was seeing that every school that I attended and that I've also read through in this was interested in trying to bring their volunteer support into those schools. And I also think that it would be really great if the district could design a rubric for how to be a functional volunteer within the district, and also for the district to learn how to recognize the support that those volunteers provide. I also think that the final thing I wanted to say was that I definitely recognize that while I want unity for our schools, and I think everyone ends up in this building in the end, not everyone is interested so much in trying to find common unity. They really want to be able to have their buildings as they are. They would rather, what I found is they'd rather have the buildings in the conditions they are in than to change the building's conditions. But, okay, one last thing.
Yeah.
There's a huge need for program support. One of the things, I left Silvercrest crying, honestly. I mean, they are just in a position right now where they need a lot of teachers, and I think I saw it best right here. It says that, as in earlier meetings, several parents want the school year is going well, but we do not have a counselor. Another parent mentioned the school lacks a librarian, music teacher, covered play structure, and needs a new gym floor for a new gym. It was recommended that the cafeteria be moved from the basement. And I feel like that's just a good example of what I saw many times, is the ways that these staff present their workarounds as easy, but they're really doing amazing levels of workaround. And so I think as a community, we should work on finding ways for our volunteers to get in there. And I also think that we should find a way to want our kids out of the basement.
Yeah,
Thanks.
and that was, I mean, you went to 3, but every single one, that was a thread through all of them. So thank you. All right, who's next? Tom, you want to go?
So I really kind of want to echo what Liza just said. It was, I would say the way some of the questions were phrased was a little different than I thought would be best. And in fact, the way they were phrased actually, I think, engaged communities in a way that was critical and necessary. I personally would not have said, I don't wish to have consolidation in my administration, under my administration. And initially I was like annoyed by that, but in fact, stating that up front generated enthusiasm for the meetings in a way that we would have never gotten engagement, we would have just gotten anger. And there was actually genuine enthusiasm for a new middle school bond. And I actually think that the possibility of passing a bond is like we have not had in probably a decade or more. And when I was listening to all the different nuances, I will say, I think that when it came down to the basic message, it was, we want support. Everybody wants a little bit something different, but when it comes down to the essence, I would say the interest in passing a bond for the middle school was very clear. There was a willingness or enthusiasm, so it wasn't the two, and I will take either. We need a middle school, and the specific interest in anything else, I would say the background noise was, given a choice, I'd rather just vote for a simple bond that is very concrete, I can understand, and anything else that involves roofing or bathrooms, there's too many variables there, and it could be taken and used in not a very productive way, and I'm not sure I would support that. A significant portion of the population, not the majority, but enough that would make a swing vote, I'd say, we're feeling that way, and that changed my perspective on where I would want to go with the bond, to keeping it a very simple, focused bond that was the minimum amount to build a really high quality building that would move forward for a century.
Okay, thank you. Lisa has to go, even though she's not on board.
I think this K-8 work group and the listening sessions were really, really good for our district. I think it was very positive. People definitely felt heard. It was neat the way people turned out for these meetings. I think to me that's building from the ground. Let's build relationships. Let's trust each other. Most of us, people are reading things across Facebook and different things, and people in town, it's just driving these wedges between town and country. And the reality is, the country people love their schools. They're content with what they have. I work at Victor Point. Our staff rarely complains about the facilities. We have some issues. Lauren knows that. But for the most part, they're there for the kids. Education is what is really priority. And it's just like it says here, best thing we have is our community support. That's what people like. The smaller, anytime you're in any kind of group, the smaller, the more, you just feel engaged more. So your teachers are engaged with your parents are engaged with, everybody's engaged together. Students, teachers, parents. You're working together, PTC stuff. We worked arm in arm. I made some great friendships with PTCs for years. you put a lot of labor into that school and you own it. So I think, I don't know that country people are necessarily saying, no, we don't want you telling people to have things. It's just, you know what, we love what we have. We'd like you to have the same what we have. It's really, you know, I think that's where we want to end that.
Thank you.
Is Wally not here? No Wally.
Wally's out of town.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'll just keep it based on to what I saw in the process. I spoke enough, but as far as the findings that I found, if it was between, so like just to Eliza's point, it is true. There are a lot of facility wants, for sure, by the communities that we went and asked. But if it came down to the facility or keeping their community, it's not even close. They'll make it work, and they'll make it work for as long as it'll take. But again, it was an amazing process. It was a lot of fun to be a part of it. I'm grateful for the opportunity. I have a lot of opinions, but as far as what I know to be true in representing what we heard, there's definitely a lot of community pride, but there is some significant, I think, staffing needs, but that's obvious because of COVID. But Silvercrest was an interesting one. Reading through I didn't go to that one, but when we disunified, they said they lost a lot. I don't think they ever thought they got it back. Is that about right?
I would say that that's exactly it.
So it's obviously very difficult to fill those voids, but I do know this, that when we try to figure out the volunteerism part of it, we try to figure out some of the staff thing that goes to build trust, which they can go and help to pass a bond. But it's a very difficult problem to solve, and that's an admin issue, but I think you guys did a great job of just hearing them out. So wish you luck going forward and when you report back. All right.
Great. Can I get the clicker?
Yeah.
Thank you, Brett. Thank you, everybody. That was very, very enlightening. Angela and I have had the privilege of working with you almost 2 years now. I mean, when you really think about that, 2 years in a long-range facility planning process is really in depth, and rightfully so. That's really what this community needed, I think, is kind of that in-depth look in composition. BLRB has the privilege of working with a lot of districts in Oregon, in Washington. Just right now we're under contract for about 8 long-range facility planning efforts and master planning efforts in Oregon alone. And both Angela and Greg and others are involved in all those. The reason why I bring that up is their perspective to be shared there. And those processes generally take about 5 to 6 months and 5 meetings. That's kind of a rough number. The involvement that this committee has had and the community has had in their schools is just, I think, exemplary of how much you really, really care about your schools, your facilities, and everybody that goes to those schools. 516 people attended these K-8 work sessions, these listening sessions. That's amazing. That is really, really incredible. And so I think that this effort, coupled with that effort and all the efforts that came before that, has been very, very, very comprehensive in nature. And I think this group has done amazing work in bringing about the need to really engage the K-8 community under the leadership of Scott and Brett and Steve and others, and having Eliza, and Tom and Lisa and Josh involved in those and adding their perspective in those, I think has been really, really great. So just wanted to commend everybody on that effort. You know, the work that we've done over the last 2 years, we've really got what we need for the long-range facility plan, for a very comprehensive long-range facility plan. So we want to walk through just kind of what goes into a long-range facility plan tonight. But before we do that, we just wanted to share, you know, some of the kind of high findings, if you will, of each K-8 community, and what there was general consensus on, and at least in those listening sessions, on some program improvements that would be ideal for them, that we had not previously captured in our priority list. Some of these we actually heard during our educational adequacy meetings. Some of them we did not. But this kind of gives you a sense of what they're looking for. And what you'll see is there's a lot of commonalities and parallels between that, you know, going back to some of those needs. Covered play area was something that we heard quite a bit in this report. And when I say we, you know, that's you all, right? I wasn't part of the listening sessions, and I think that was the right decision. But when you go through the report, these are some of those items. Central how, you know, improved parking, additional flexible learning space. Again, that additional flexible learning space was something that we see a couple times at a couple different schools. So kind of providing, in a sense, some of that unity, some of that equity is something that could really come out of that and that prioritization. Evergreen, a gymnasium, restroom improvements at Silvercrest K-8. We've budgeted some dollars just to give a sense of scale for some of those. And
This was not the groups, this is things that they want from the listening sessions, correct?
exactly, from the
By
listening
the schools
sessions.
that we went to go to.
Yep. That's some of those things that were
Correct.
vetted
So these
out.
were not things that we recommended, these are things that we are heard and we're gonna say that we heard them. Is that how it went?
Absolutely,
Yeah.
Josh. That's a good clarification there. Again, Butte Creek, additional classroom space for science and art. Scotts Mills, that covered play area again. Replacement, upgrade of current gym floor. Kitchen expansion. Separate middle school restroom. And then Victor Point had some restroom needs. That additional flexible learning space. And then moving the kitchen to the gym area, which makes a lot of sense, and expanding that main office there. So just a rough budget number, you know, based on some of the dollar figures that we looked at before, it was about 10.3 million. So I think this is really good work in that it gives another list of priorities that can be considered by the school board, right? And so this will be in addition to P1, P2, P3 that we've seen previously, and it will be at the pleasure of the board and the bond planning committee, you know, assuming we have a bond planning committee, that will really determine how those fit into an eventual bond. You know, we looked at prioritization many times throughout this process. We actually looked at it again last time just as a temperature check to see where the committee kind of saw a bond dollar amount and what goes into those priorities. So we just wanted to honor the committee's work there and capture those thoughts, and know that will be captured in the long-range facility plan. So many of you have seen these. We've talked about them before. Tom actually shared them again, I think maybe, I don't know, 6 months ago or something like that, which is really great because it gives some context to what are the actual requirements for an ODE compliant long-range facility plan, a 10-year plan. And there's really kind of 5 overarching requirements for that. And so, you know, I get the honor of boring you to death tonight of how we complied with all of those requirements and kind of the executive summary, if you will, of each one of those individual sections. This again will be executive in nature, you know, high summary. We are drafting the report right now, and it'll be much more comprehensive, and will be similar in scale and size to this, with a lot of appendices associated with it. But the first one is population projections by school age for the next 10 years, using U.S. Census or Census partner data, collaboration with local government planning and agencies that results in identification of suitable school sites and site acquisition schedules, evidence of community involvement in 4 different items, and again, we'll go in more detail on these in the coming slides. That's really, that item number 3 is a big component of this long-range facility planning committee, in which you all have really helped guide and shape through this process. The 4th item is identification of building on historic preservation lists, including National Historic, SHPO, so that's Oregon State Historic Preservation Office, and then the local, any kind of local building list, so Silverton's, local building list there. The 5th item, this again is one of those really, really critical components, and it's tangential to that community involvement piece because of the way that we facilitated and conducted this. It's the analysis of the educational requirements, the educational adequacy at each individual school site. And again, we'll go into more detail on this here in a few minutes. So just starting off kind of one by one, and we'll just tick down the list and give you some high-level summary of compliance with those different items, because this is a technical report and it has to be technical in nature in our response. So there is that piece, there is that caveat there. So the enrollment projections, the reason why ODE is interested in enrollment projections is because of capacity needs, right? That's really the overarching goal of that particular requirement. Is there enough enrollment to influence or necessitate another school, or additions to a school? What we have found in the PSU Population Center report was at that high level, they were projecting 6% growth over 10 years. Now, I caveat that all by saying COVID has really changed things quite a bit. Enrollment's down because of COVID. So some of these findings are, any of these kinds of findings through any of these enrollment projections are going to be a little bit different than what we would have anticipated.
Are you seeing that statewide? Like public school enrollment is down, or is that just our district?
That's your district.
Statewide.
And many of the districts we're currently working with are struggling with the same piece, and they don't know if they're going to realize their enrollment to full capacity even after mask mandates and COVID protocols are lessened. So I would say, the majority of all of our districts are struggling with enrollment.
So they're either going private or doing something different.
Or they're just staying at home or doing remote learning, right? So there is that capacity, or that component to it.
Yeah. So really the big takeaway on this particular item, if there was one takeaway to take from this, projected growth in enrollment is not a contributing factor to this long-range facility planning process. Now, what is a contributing factor and is less, I guess you'd say, tangible as it relates to ODE, is that you have a lot of students learning in portables at Silverton Middle School in particular, and that is not an ideal learning environment. Having students in portables just is not a very good learning environment. So that is something to consider, when you have the capacity for 350 students in the permanent building and the rest of them are in portables. I think that's one key takeaway to take from that particular item. Moving on to the second item here, which is that collaboration with local government and identification of suitable sites. There's 2 pieces to this requirement here. And the reason for collaboration with local government in identification of suitable sites is to see if there's any kind of parallel, any kind of combined efforts between the school district and the local government in the acquisition of those sites. So if you all recall, we did have the community development director at many of our long-range facility planning meetings, and that was on purpose because having Jason there was a component of that collaboration. He was part of the process when we evaluated using the north site, what we call the north site over at Silverton Middle School, which is a district-owned property, but the recommendation coming out of this committee was to not pursue that avenue and to really have a phased replacement of Silverton Middle School on the Schlater Street campus side. The not having a need for that increased capacity and coupled with some of the findings from these listening sessions, the not having the will to consolidate from the community really kind of gets us to a spot on this identification of suitable school sites, as in why would the district buy property that's not needed for building another school? So there was no need to buy additional property. We did look at that north site as an alternative site, and so that's how we met that requirement there. The second part of that requirement, collaboration with local government, is that site acquisition schedules and programs, and this is very much in parallel with the previous requirement, in that if we're not acquiring additional sites, then there's no need for a site acquisition schedule or program. So that's kind of that guy. The third requirement, and this is again is the really great work that this committee has done over the last 2 years, is this evidence of community involvement findings. This isn't just this committee. This is everything from our educational adequacy assessments that we conducted last year. This is those K-8 listening sessions that have happened over the course of this year. There's been just amazing community involvement in this process. So a big component of that is determining the educational vision of the local community. And I want to stress that local piece, because as we heard in these K-8 listening sessions, each one of these schools has their own culture, their own identity, their own community. And so their educational vision for their individual facility may look a little bit different. And we vetted that out in our educational adequacy assessments. We also furthered that when we programmed the middle school, the Silverton Middle School with Brett, and vetted that out through the long-range facility planning process. We looked at some sites and some options for the Silverton Middle School to see how that could shape up. We looked at things like grade level groupings and small learning communities. We gave a primer to all of that in long-range facility planning meeting number 5, when we looked at kind of forward-thinking learning environments. And we really listened again in those K-8 listening sessions. So that community involvement and the educational vision of the local community is exemplary. And so that really is a testament to this committee's work and the work of the district and leadership and others that were involved in those works. Also, evidence of community involvement in reviewing the cost of identified improvements. We did that quite a bit and at length, really beginning in earnest in long-range facility planning number 8, when we vetted out 8 different options for kind of structuring what a 10-year plan could look like. We ultimately recommended, this committee recommended through consensus and voting, that we would pursue an option number D, which was replacement of the Silverton Middle School classroom wing, keeping the gymnasium, and select improvements at every site. that really is tangential to this third requirement of the third requirement, the prioritization of identified improvements. Again, using that option D as the baseline for that planning scenario. There was really kind of three priorities that came out of that, and they were cumulative, right? The option D was the baseline. We had P1, which is that, and then P2, P3, and then subsequently the listening sessions have brought about some more priorities there. We've addressed deferred maintenance, educational adequacy, safety and security needs, accessibility needs in that. Those priorities were shared in the long-range planning meeting number 10, refined in 11. And we've actually had, 5 meetings that had some level of prioritization. And this really gets to one of the significant elements of a long-range facility planning process, was to identify the priorities and then essentially write those into the long-range facility planning process. So the board and the bond planning committee would have some priorities to work with, in a sense. The fourth requirement, that identification of historic buildings, again, that's just an identification of historic buildings. That's not we're looking to register buildings or anything like that. Basically what that's about is SHPO, the State Historic Preservation Office, is short-staffed, is a kind of a kind way of saying it. And they've deferred that responsibility over the years to local districts to help them identify buildings that could be historic so that they could put those in the database. So we do have all but 3 schools that technically could qualify for historic based just on age. And that's the requirement. That's kind of the starting requirement to classify you as a potentially historic building. There is no building in this district that is currently on the register, and we'll say as such in our long-range facility planning document. The only building the district once had that is on the register is the old Victor Point. And that's on the register, but that's of no consequence to this long-range facility planning process because that's no longer owned by the school district. We also just took it a step further and presented a facility aging matrix, if you remember, in meeting number 11, just to give everybody kind of a sense for how old the buildings were, how old the additions were, and kind of how old they will be in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. The third, or the fourth component of that element was determining potential sources of funds for improvements. And again, we had Piper Sandler did a really great job developing those bond scenarios early on in the process. This, I think, was in long-range facility planning meeting number 2. It was before we came on board, the initial one. They looked at 3 different scenarios at that time, 60, 70, and 80 million. And then that was updated with looking at a scenario of up to 130 million. We use those as really kind of foundational for the prioritization to give it some sort of foundation of understanding there. So in addition to that, Silver Falls School District is eligible for a $4 million Awesome grant. And so that's something you would have to apply for. That's after the long-range facility planning document is submitted and accepted by ODE, and that would be in anticipation for an eventual bond. So that would be something that the district would look to acquire before filing with the county. And then the fifth one, this one's really interesting. This is the educational adequacy review standards. And the reason why this one's interesting is because much like every other document or bylaw or anything like that, it changes. Everything changes, on a yearly or biennium basis. And so if you actually go to this requirement now, it looks a little bit different than what you see up on the screen. And the reason being is October, they changed it, just slightly, not much. But we're grandfathered into this older OAR requirement for educational adequacy. That being said, because of the comprehensive nature of our educational adequacy and how we conducted those and facilitated those, we would still be in compliance with even the new standard, even more so there. So they're really looking for identification of standards adopted by the district, the ability of the current facility capacity. Its capacity is a big component there. And then, really looking at those deficiencies and alternatives and opportunities for enhancing that. As a reminder, we did meet with every school last year, at the K-8 and K-5 levels, and at that time it was the K-2 and 3-5. We met with just about every teacher, administrator, I would say probably about 85 to 90% of them. And really kind of got a sense for the educational adequacy from their perspective as teachers within their schools. How do those spaces work and function for them? At the middle school, it was more a little bit more department heads, but we had pretty good turnout at the middle school as well. At the high school, it was definitely, just because of the size of it, it was department heads that we really talked to. So we got a really good cross section of the educational adequacy there. Many of you may remember this spreadsheet here. This was something that we had authored and came up with. And what's highlighted up here in yellow are the new requirements that this OAR is requiring. There's 5 of them. One is capacity. That's what you see on this first page here in that top area. But we look at it from a variety of perspectives, not just the capacity and how the school can accommodate that, but is the classroom large enough to accommodate the program that it's in, from core capacity to science to CTE, et cetera. So we look at all of those functions. We also look at technology, supervision, and security. There's really 8 categories and 43 subcategories that we look at, and we go line by line with the user groups, and it was really, really illuminating for us and kind of helped shape the long-range facility planning process there. On the second page here again, the rest of those 4 requirements that are currently needed are acoustics, lighting, temperature, and then indoor air quality. So again, if you look at this section right here under our learning environments, in that comprehensive approach we've taken, we've already accommodated all of those. So even if we were going under the new one, we would still be covered there. So I guess the message being, the educational adequacy is a very, very comprehensive document. There will actually be a lot of meat to that in the long-range facility planning report, and so that'll be really good. The final piece to that is identification of changes needed for that educational adequacy. And before we broke for the summer, there was a really great suggestion to just developing a script or developing a brochure that really was cumulative of all the effort and succinct and easy to read. And this really is that. I mean, this is that identification of changes needed and then the avenues upon which we would improve upon those needs there. So this will be included in that long-range facility planning report with a lot more detail to that, and so that's kind of that there. So what are the next steps for the long-range facility planning report? Really, we have to finalize the report and finish writing it. Again, there will be appendices associated with that. We will have a final meeting, just so everybody can see the report. There will be a submission to ODE, and we will preemptively send them some sections just to make sure that we're in compliance with everything.
Why would we send something to ODE before the school board? Because doesn't the school board reserve the right to change anything?
They do. They do.
I'm just
No, we would talk to the school board first and then send it to ODE.
Okay.
Yep.
That's
So-
a good comment, that
that's
those
a-
need to be really flipped in just a
Yeah, that's,
summary,
yep,
good point.
that's a great
So the
comment.
order would actually be D then C.
It would be,
Okay.
yep.
Correct, yep. Exactly, good point there.
And that would be in, never mind. Well, I'm just assuming, why do we just, do we send an ODE regardless if the board decides to move forward with it, or
Just to show a report of the work so that we reserve the awesome grant.
I'm not understanding the question, because we're gonna submit, I mean, we'll submit it to the board, if
Yeah.
there's, questions, comments, what have you, we can edit that, but we do need the acceptance of the board, but we'll submit that to ODE, or ODE to get our awesome grant, right? That's
Of the plan though, right? Not
What's
of-
that?
It's of the plan, not of the bond.
Right, I understand, that's a really good point.
That's-
This is a living, long-range facility plan, living document, technical document, and it's really got a lot of meat to it. We don't need a bond recommendation out of this plan, that was not the intent, so we won't be looking for the board to approve a bond recommendation. They'll look at it, approve the technical document, and then we'll submit it to ODE. Does that make some sense?
Yeah, it's a record of the work.
It's a record of the work, and it's a living document that the school board will use for, hopefully, quite some time, so.
So just to clarify, my impression coming to this meeting tonight was that we would be heavily discussing what to recommend in the way of a bond to the school board. And we have the long-range facility plan that also has to go with that recommendation. But they're two separate items in my perspective. And are we gonna be, is that sort of what we're doing tonight?
We are not looking for a bond recommendation to come out of tonight, if that's what you're asking.
Are we going to be making recommendations to the board about what?
That's not really the task of this committee. You guys have done excellent work. The task of this committee was to, or any long-range facility planning committee, was to develop a thoughtful, living technical document with consensus-built facility improvement plan over a 10 to 12-year plan. But you've done that. We're gonna submit it to the board, and if they want to develop a bond recommendation or develop a committee to finalize a bond recommendation, that's up to them. But this plan is really meeting the requirements of what Jonah outlined. You've done the great work. You've prioritized, and we're gonna include your priorities and your preferences. The next work of a bond recommendation is a separate effort. Does that make some sense?
It does. I mean, I guess since we have a few board members here, I'd be curious if they would like to hear from anybody in any open discussion, if they wanted to, if they would like anything more from us, because if I'm correct, our next meeting is, what's our next meeting doing? We're essentially, we're good, this is what we're doing, we're signing off on it.
Last meeting is in January.
But what are we
sign-
s-
we
what are
don't
we
sign
signing off
It's all
on?
been, all that's been done by consensus. It's not a sign off, it's just so that BLRB can show us the final report.
When do we decide on the amount?
That's the board's pleasure to figure that out.
That's what I'm a little unclear of, is I still don't understand what the plan is.
I mean, my impression from this whole process is we were going to make suggestions to the board on where really a temperature check on what the district needs and what our recommendations would be for moving forward. Yes, we'll have a plan, but we're actually making recommendations to the board for where to put their energy.
So the plan is strictly the different tiers of what we want to do if we get the money. And if we don't pass a bond, we don't get the money, then we have a plan, or we pick away at that plan with the general budget. I mean, what is the, that's where I'm still unclear, like, what is the plan? Pie in the sky, 175 million to fix everything is a great plan.
Right.
You don't have, I mean,
You
so that's.
guys have a very thoughtful, you've identified up to $175 million worth of improvements. We don't have, it was never the intent, nor should it be, I believe, in all my experience in long-range facility plans, it's very unusual that we would get a unanimous single recommendation for a bond issuance out of a long-range plan. That's not the intent, really, it really isn't. It's to identify those long-range facility plan needs. Incredible work. I mean, the board has the challenge of taking this long-range plan and then developing a bond recommendation out of it, right? My guess is, there's a variety of options to that. The board could wrestle with that decision, or they could develop a committee for a bond planning committee to wrestle that. And this would be an incredible foundational element that would inform that process, right? Does that make some sense, what I'm trying to say there? So,
Colin, this is really the summary of the work that's been done on the committee. here.
Right, so this is the plan.
Yes.
yeah,
That's the plan, is to fix all that, figuring out how much money we have. And then the board prioritizes what to fix out of that based on the amount of bond passes.
right. And then stagger that and have a bond scenario of when the next bond should be issued, and et cetera, or how much can we really do with volunteer work, which is probably fairly limited with the large amount of work, but I mean, I love that idea.
I think it'd be better if we just call it data. This is the data we collected, we presented, because there's options in here, right? So that the plan is options,
Right.
correct?
Right, that is part of that prioritization.
Yes.
ODE
Yeah.
requirement.
Okay.
But I mean, this is just a report from the listening sessions, right? Like
Yeah.
what he just detailed is the
Totally separate.
gathering of all of the information that is required by the ODD for the long-range facility plan.
Exactly.
And then somehow that goes forward as a recommendation to the board. I think what you're wondering on, what I'm wondering on is, where is the word recommendation? Where does that fall into this? It's just, are we just giving a report, or is there some form of recommendation in that report? Like the bond scenario concepts that you made a flyer of?
There are the priorities that are in there. So the priorities 1, 2, and 3. There's the KA.
Mhm.
So it gives the board the information they need to assess where the needs are.
Yeah, this is a long-range facility planning report. It's a document, it's a data piece. Yep. Meeting the requirements of ODE, right?
Okay.
One of the, ODE does not require a recommendation out of the long-range planning effort. It requires facility improvement scenarios, right? And that's what you guys have done very, very well.
Let's fix them.
I think it's fair to say, though, that while you'll be presenting a plan to the school board where you did all the heavy lifting for them, which is huge, that there are some things that the consensus of the group agreed on, like replacing Silverton Middle School, and that the Acadia communities don't want to close or consolidate, and that we could focus on warm, safe, and dry, and we did a dot exercise that showed this group tended to favor E3, or whatever that outcome was. But there's a lot of factors to consider moving forward, including escalation costs and when we pass it and all those types of things. So it's hard to say right now, this is the plan we're going to go with, but these were some takeaways that the consensus of the group agreed on. If you wanted to say, yes, we're making these recommendations. So I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but as far as the technical piece that needs to be turned into ODE, Jonah covered what that looks like, and I think the plan would be to have that in official report format sent to you prior to the January meeting, which I believe we're going to select a date in mid-January to have that meeting. Have lead time for you all to be able to review that report, come back, give any final input, potential edits and changes, making sure we have it dialed in. And then I think the goal would be to have a few of you and probably Jonah's team present to the school board potentially at the January work session. So the board would have time to consider for the Valentine's Day meeting on February 14th, the regular school board meeting, to just, like, what is the vote for the board at that point? To just accept
To accept
the
the
plan
document.
to
Yep.
put on, to give to ODE, which is no decision on a bond amount or timing of a bond amount, but that we acknowledge the work of this committee and passing it forward to ODE is what I understand.
I
But
think
correct
that
me if
makes a
I'm
lot of sense. I think that somewhere along the way, the word report turned into recommendation, and so there was some
Sure.
confusion as the group.
sure.
But I'll agree
And
with that.
also, I would say that this is a lot of information to receive and digest, and then not have it influence our report.
Yeah, and I believe this would be an appendix,
This would, we're gonna
appendix
include
to
this
the
as a
report, this
appendice
whole
to
Okay.
the
report,
report,
yeah.
Thank you.
absolutely. Because like you said, it's an incredibly valuable document to the overall strategy, right? I mean, it really is.
So I have a question,
So-
then. If you're gonna incorporate that, you had a slide here earlier of what each school wants. Central Howell wants improved parking. That's not on here for 1, 2, 3.
That slide was specifically for items that were not in P1, 2, or 3. There were
Right.
lots of other projects at each school that were already identified, and many of them mentioned in these meetings. And all of those comments are captured in this report, and as Jonah mentioned, that would be a separate list that popped out that were not already in P1, P2, P3 that came out of additional community input as, you know, that would be submitted as part of the plan.
Exactly.
Or
and
part
we
of the
would-
report.
We would share that with, as an outcome of this K listening session, right?
Yeah.
So it would
Yeah.
be separated.
Yeah, and that'll be written into that community involvement piece, just the K-8 listening session, some of the high-level recommendations coming out of that, or, you know, priorities coming out of that, if you will.
So then, if that doesn't happen, because we're talking about trust, that's gonna come down to the school board having a discussion in an open meeting saying, hey, we understand that you want parking, we've looked into parking, we can't expand your parking. That's not us. We're out of that. Our committee has done the 1, 2, 3. They said what they want a covered area, parking here, whatever. We're done, that's not up to us to recommend, so that's gonna be strictly on the school board to look at. If a bond passes, here's where the money's gonna go.
Well, before, because they'll have to put it in a
Before.
bond. My understanding is they have to describe that in the bond when they decide to make it
So
up.
you're gonna have, the board's gonna have to make a decision of, is it more important to have parking if it's available rather than repair HVAC, water intrusion and all that based on the amount of funds?
But take it even bigger, like, this is our report, and one of the, I mean, basically, we're recommending that we build a new middle school. The board could look at all this and say, yeah, we think we should do something different. You know, so, I mean, we're making recommendations, and then the board has to have the difficult decision of, or the committee they create, to make some, they gotta be pretty wise with how to balance the trust thing, what to take into account, what not to do, inflation, all the stuff that's gonna happen in the next couple of years. But I think we've given them a ton, I mean, the fact that this committee, with how many different perspectives we have, and going out to all the K-8s, I didn't hear hesitation on a middle school. Now, I know when the dollars and cents come out and all that stuff, it could change a little bit, but, I mean, the fact that we could come up with, let's build a brand-new middle school, and pretty much everybody that I've talked to is in favor of that, I think that's a huge recommendation that the board probably should seriously consider,
But
you
we're
know.
not giving a recommendation now, so I think the misunderstanding
Yeah.
is we were doing an ODE report as part of the requirement for the long-range planning facility.
Right.
But the communication has been is that we will come up with a couple options
Yeah.
of a bond to throw at the board before the February meeting, so then they can discuss it and say, we don't like A, B, but we're gonna have a parking lot in Central Howell kind of thing. But now we're saying that January, we approve the ODE one, and then here you go, board, there is no recommendation. This is what the district wants as a group, but you gotta go figure out how you wanna write your own thing. So I think there's a little I don't know if it's communication or what, because if you go back through some of our emails and stuff, you're gonna make a recommendation or two to the board by the February meeting. Well, we're not really making a recommendation. We're saying this is our ODE approval plan, or whatever word you wanna use, data plan. And now the board's gotta go through or make a committee or whatever they're gonna do, basically start all over to create themselves
I think you are making a recommendation.
I
You're
think
making a
you are.
recommendation to build a new Silverton Middle School, to strongly consider P3, and to look at the other options presented at the listening sessions.
Well,
I'm actually gonna,
I'm hearing that, though, that you guys are suggesting the board may appoint another committee to help them with the bond. How likely is that to happen?
Geez,
Based upon
that would be a
what
board
they have
meeting.
here?
That'd be a board decision.
Yeah, that would be their decision.
Right.
But they're,
And gone through all the three.
this committee's done a tremendous amount of work, dollar sign wise. And I can't see the board, doing it again.
I have a quick recommendation. I don't know what the rest of the agenda is for the night. I mean, it's simple. What's after this, Jonah?
That was it.
Okay, so this is just my recommendation after doing the listening sessions with Jerry. Jerry did a great job of making sure everybody had an opportunity to say what they wanted to say. But if we could maybe just keep that brief,
Yeah,
so that way some of the people that are here that maybe haven't spoken tonight could like,
absolutely.
and I know, obviously it's not throw a wrench in the whole thing, but, because that way somebody can like, I really like this and it's great. For where I'm at, like that's all I want out of this after this, because I thought it was a great process. We don't have to do that, but there are some options, because I know there's probably some people that, because we have a couple of board members here, if they got to hear like, well, they don't want a small bond or big bond, if they could explain it, but that way they can hear it. I don't know.
Yeah,
I'm for the big one personally, but
yeah.
I just like to hear some of the people that haven't spoke yet.
No, and that's really good.
If we can
Josh.
keep it brief, but it'd be nice that people leave feeling like they got heard.
Yeah, and that's kind of part of this.
Okay,
this
cool.
Last segment
Awesome.
was we just wanted to go around the room one
Okay.
by one. You know, what did we learn
Yeah.
today? What are our impressions of what was presented today? And if you want to, you know, if you want to just speak your mind on any of the items, this is a great opportunity to do that. So, yeah, I think that's really kind of it. And we've got half an hour.
Oh, awesome.
You know, so, because that's really the rest of the agenda. So,
May I mention something? I'm a board member, and I'm very concerned that there are members on this committee that are a little confused. And I think they should be given the right to ask more questions for clarification. It seems like there's a core group of you that completely understand it, probably because you've experienced it. But some of you sound like you still have some very real questions that you want some further definition on, and I think the committee deserves that with the long hours that they've given.
absolutely.
And their investment, and that's where I'm at.
Excellent. Kind of agree with you, Warren. Absolutely. Yeah. Well, should we start on this end, Ray? Did you want to offer a thought or?
Sure. Well, I remembered in some of our many meetings that at one point in time I thought, well, you know, there's a bunch of paperwork we need to do for the ODE. But then, and as Lori said, I'm probably somewhat confused because then we start talking about dollars, size of the bond, what it costs to do what this, what it costs to do that. And so now I'm hearing that the board may, which they're entitled to do, obviously, change some of the things that we've kind of decided. So that's a bit of frustration for me. I have no problem with what we've done. I think it's great. The listening sessions were great. I would comment just briefly for Scott, if you decide to have future listening sessions with these schools, I think it would be good to remind those folks of what they said earlier, which you've encapsulated in here, and then have a little discussion with them about their wishes, their desires, their thoughts, and so on, because they need to hear comments from the district as to what is feasible, what's the state requires, and all that sort of thing. It's got to be more. I think if I told you, it seems to me if you just sit and listen, there is the implicit promise that you get what you want, which not necessarily can be done. So, thank you.
I don't know, but I think we did a huge, like they said, a lot of the legwork. I would think the board would probably take a lot of our work and go forward with it. I mean, I guess I trust that they would make a good decision.
I think in the midst of 2 years of doing this, I think we, and I did too, started looking at like we are making the recommendations about what to do. And I would think that what we've done and what we're going to give the board, they have to make the ultimate decisions about how much and maybe some tweaks on what we've done. But I would be surprised if they would alter it a ton. But their part is then they have to do a bond committee to come up with the language of doing the bond. And so it's not replicating what we've done, it's taking what we've done and it's their purview to change it. But I would think after this, especially with what we've done, I mean, our decision about the middle school and taking the time to go to all the K-8s, if they were to tweak that, then, then I would wonder about the trust that we've built. So I think we're giving them great stuff, and I would hope that they would, implicit in all the stuff that we have presented to them are recommendations. They're recommendations that are clear. It's just what they're going to do with it is now up to them.
Second, all of it. I think we did great work. My only concern, I guess, would be is when it comes to the bond amount. Granted, that goes to the school board, but we went out, we said, we listened. We got, I mean, if we just go the minimal amount, I can understand why we would do that. We keep our promise and we get it done. But then we create two separate bonds for almost two separate communities. So I'm a little concerned about that. And then we said, well, we know you want this, but then we don't give it to them again. Do we lose all the trust that we built? We can listen, but if you don't respond to when you listen to things. And some of the things could be maybe not even monetary. They could just be administration things about having involvement with their principal selections and stuff like that. You can build trust without having to, say, build a gymnasium or some big things. So that's my take on it and my recommendation, but I think I'm very happy with the work that we've done, and I think, luckily, because the school board was at some of these listening sessions, I think they have a good pulse of it, too. So.
Great. Thanks, Josh.
It is weird to not recommend something, I guess. We've got options. But with all the smaller groups, with the small schools, even the idea of going for P1 and then when the second bond for the high school goes off, we are intending to do the remainder of that in an additional bond. Some sort of language like that, I would feel really good about. Saying we will do P1 now, that bond goes off in X amount of years, and we will finalize and finish the rest of the things on the list.
So you're talking including P2 and P3?
Yes. Yeah, I would want everything to be heard and saying, okay, we're going to do this now and then this later when that bond comes off. Because I think that's one of our mistrusts in the community was they didn't communicate this is what's going to happen next. And we need to say what's going to happen next.
Can I pass for now and go at the end?
That's cheating. All right. Eliza.
Well, this has been a really interesting experience for me. I've learned so much. My mind has moved around in terms of what I think the needs are. I definitely voted high on the bond choice because I think that there's a lot of needs, and honestly, I think we should either build a middle school or take care of all of it. So I suppose my temperature check has shifted a little after getting some real time to listen to this and report. I also received it last week. But I just feel like, I understood that we were creating a report. I just think maybe sometimes language shifts a little bit. And maybe it would have been helpful for me from the very beginning to have a piece of paper that listed what the ODE requirements were, so that I knew where we were in the process. And also, I look forward to hearing more discussions in our community about how the board will decide to utilize this report. Because it is difficult, and like I say, I think we need to try to continue to build unity and create community involvement, and I know that there's a lot of licensed and bonded contractors in this area that are really interested in trying to support these schools, and that perhaps even a discussion about legacy at some of these buildings could become a conversation. And I don't think that is included in this report. Thank you.
Thank you, Liza. Melissa?
So first, this might have been my mistake, but I didn't realize that others of us were invited to the K-8 listing sessions. So I didn't have a chance to go because I didn't realize that we were invited. But I'm really excited to hear that there was some positive feedback about a new middle school. I've been feeling a little down about this whole facilities process, but that makes me really happy, so that's good. I also, like Eliza, I understood that we were creating a report that follows the requirements, but I guess I thought that we were also at the same time creating, here's our recommendation to the board. Otherwise, all the talk about the dollars and the bonds, it kind of doesn't make sense. Anyway. Yeah. Then the next thing I would say is that all along the way when we were voting and making the choices about D and the priorities and which bond number are you going for, I heard that it was a kind of a temperature check and that it wasn't set in stone. We were just voting in that moment and where we're all feeling. And so I'm feeling like we never had a real final vote. And especially after receiving this, I think that some people's votes would change.
Yeah.
So that's a big concern for me.
I would absolutely agree with Melissa. I felt, and perhaps it was just me, but I've quietly been sitting in on the meetings. I was not a part of the summer sessions. That's fine. But I feel in some ways, as important as it was to build the trust with the listening and learning sessions, I felt it kind of overshadowed the work of the Long-Range Facilities Planning Committee and all those involved. And I do worry about the word trust, because at this point, I certainly want to hear from this committee and their concerns, and I want them to be clear as they step forward. And I just feel that there have been a lot of different mechanisms and wheels spinning, and I just don't want one aspect to overshadow another, nor do I want to see, we do have some amazing cultural components in our rural schools, and now that we have placed the assurance that they will remain open in this district, we need to hear from those parents and bring them back and get them involved to continue the process and to continue their schools, because they know it better than anyone. So I think that's extremely critical, and I think if we had probably gotten those words sooner, Scott, it may have impacted the directive of the conversations over the last year as well, but that's just me. So I do agree with Melissa, and I'd like to just have a little bit more, I guess, organization to it and understanding, frankly. Thank you for the opportunity to speak.
these other guys too, that I understood we were doing an ODA thing, but when we do all these dollar votes and where would your things be, and I haven't gone through all my notes, but I know we talked different recommendations to the board, so I guess my question to Scott or Steve or the board, we can hand this to the board, whatever final document it is, but no offense, if I'm a board member, now I gotta go read 1,000 pages of stuff to figure out, man, what did they really recommend? There's a couple in the back. We have all these different reports. We have the community reports. But now they have to either get a committee that could take them all the time to cipher through this. And we're already sitting here, kind of, but you also have the board has to go through and figure all this out again, the way I see it. Now, I could be wrong. But I know we narrowed it down by doing all our votes, but it kind of felt like we were gonna give a couple ideas, as Colin brought it, to the board to have a direction to go versus a large document. So, but I think our committee did great work, and the listening sessions, I think, were super great for all the school district included. I think that was a star for everybody. I think that worked out really well. And I think it's important that when Scott goes back to him in January, that will really, I don't know how to say it, seal the deal that he is listening, the school board's listening, everybody's listening to these outlining people, and eventually maybe the inlining schools, it sounds like, as well, but that will help build trust as well. But then the school board has to keep the ball rolling, or whoever's gonna run the show, to get this bond going, because as we know, it'll take 3, 4, 5 years before Brett's gonna get a school still, if they get it ASAP. So.
Not what you wanted to hear.
Well, you can't go any faster than that, I don't think.
It's so,
Unless you win the lottery tomorrow night.
I would say I agree with Melissa that I don't feel like we gave like our final vote, but then I also feel like I just learned that we don't really have a vote. So, I really did, I guess I'll be the one to ask the dumb questions, because I do feel like I misunderstood what we were doing. And so we've been meeting the requirements for this report for ODE that is just something that's required. Like having a long-range facility planning committee is just something that's required. Like those are separate things. We were also meeting these requirements for the Awesome grant, but that's like a separate side thing. And then that grant's tied to a bond or not tied to a bond? Like that grant only exists if we get a bond, right?
That's correct.
Okay, so we were doing the report for OD just because it's something that's required of our district, right?
Right.
Okay.
The district.
Separate from the Awesome grant?
It's separate from the Awesome grant. So the district, procured a long-range facility planning grant from ODE, that gives them, X amount of dollars to procure services to develop a long-range facility plan.
So if we were a district that didn't need a new middle school, we would have just sat around for 2 years talking about what we want to.
No, that's why the other ones do it in 5 or 6 months.
Right? People that don't need new schools are also having these committees and making these reports.
Right, every district is
It's
unique with
required.
facility needs.
But every district has to have this committee and turn these reports into the state.
You have to have a
Yes.
long-range facility plan to even be eligible.
That's what
Right, yeah, to be eligible for the Awesome grant and.
But I feel like we also talked about how we should be making a 20-year plan and a 30-year plan, and then we got really into our bond, and then we're talking all about I don't know, I definitely will say tonight that I feel very unclear about what I just did for the last 2 years. Honestly, I'm being honest, I do not feel like I'm the only one here who feels that way. So, I didn't really understand, and I definitely did feel like we were in the end going to say, as a committee, this is what we recommend to move forward with. So. And I will throw in what everybody else did. I also thought the listening sessions were amazing. And it was a really great thing for our whole big district-wide community. So just to put that in with how, like, I also am really confused about everything happening.
Great.
I'll end on a positive note for you.
Thank you.
And I'd like to just do a lot of listening before I respond, so that's the only reason why I'm not responding.
Okay.
It's a good thing. Tom?
All right. I have to say there's three different directions my head is going. With recommendations P1, P2, P3, I remember the session where we voted on that, and I couldn't find some of the references. We had like 8 different choices, and we had a top 3, and I'm like, I don't even know what these are. We had like 20 minutes talking about them, and then we voted, and it was a temperature check. And I never really felt like it really represented what we've been working on. It was out of the blue. And now it's like central to what the report is saying. I understand that there is a need for a long-range plan, and the state requires it, and Dawson Grant requires it. I fully value that, and I thought we would kind of have at least a crude 20, 30-year plan attached to it. But we talked a lot about what the basic wants and needs of the district were. And I feel like we have a lot of collective knowledge and value. To form another committee to decide what to do next is like, what a waste. And it really undermines trust, actually. And I feel like, I don't know, I feel kind of annoyed.
Wait, he's my husband, so I'm going to interrupt. Can I clarify something? When they do a bond, they're required to have a bond committee, right? I mean, so I mean, I feel like we all need to hear that. Like, it's not a matter of they're going to look at all of our stuff and then say, oh, well, you guys did okay, but we want this other committee. Like, they're going to be required to have a bond committee. Okay. I just want to clarify that.
And I appreciate that, but nonetheless, it would be, it's like I thought we probably would wind up having like a 2-page letter, cover letter saying, we've kind of gone through this process, this is what we found, we've done a temperature check, we just assimilated a bunch of information from the summer listening sessions, and moving forward, this is what our gut reaction is, and then there's a secondary portion of the group that maybe feels this might actually be a beneficial place to go. And I'm hearing that they're actually not really going to be it. We're just going to have this P1, P2, and there's these different ideas, and that's that. And it's a 1,000-page document, which, I mean, as a board member, I'm like, well, how am I supposed to sift through this? I need some direction. So that's, and it really wasn't clear that we weren't going to be just making some basic recommendations. I know they make the final decision, and and I know there's other input on what the bond has to include, but I figured that would be a fairly short and sweet. We gotten this information, now we're just going to assemble it. It would be probably a couple meetings. So anyway, that's me.
Well, just a couple observations, I guess. Since I'm new board member here and only been to a couple of your meetings, but what I hear is that people have really gotten invested themselves in this process, which they should. And it just occurs to me as a board, having a strong recommendation from this committee actually could be problematic in the sense that in a way handcuffs the board to that recommendation, right? And if the board goes a different direction, then even if it's not a 180-degree different direction, but a slightly different direction, you've got this work of this committee that's been, I think there would be a lot of people that would look at that and say, well, the board has to follow that, maybe not legally, but in the sense that that's what they should do. So, well, I find it really helpful to hear the conversations that have gone on, and I don't know that you would have consensus as far as what the right strategy would be and what the right exact priority should be. You know, because those conversations can go on, and it's difficult. And I've sat through those before, you know, years ago when we did that. So I don't know that we would reach that consensus. It's very helpful to hear that conversation and to hear the inputs. But to me, probably I'd rather not have it in the form of a recommendation. So for what that's worth. But anyways, that's just some thoughts.
I just want to say I appreciate all the time and effort everyone's put in, and I think it's been a lot of great information and excellent discussion. And you know, I know the process, definitely I learned a lot about the process myself, and I know it was unique in that it extended over a long period of time and also had some significant pause, different leadership structures. A lot more people were involved at the beginning, and so I guess I wasn't even, I don't think, involved about the 6 meetings. So I just think there's, and then we focused on different areas of a plan that from the technical side covers about 5 or 6 different requirements, and we dove deeper probably than most school districts do, and I would have to think something like this is fairly unprecedented. So I came away inspired by the listening sessions every night when I drove home, and I think it was a worthwhile part. And, you know, I wish there's a little more, you know, clarity about recommendation or no. And sure, I think, you know, report, recommendation, options, those were words that were all kind of used at, you know, times that I don't think with any sort of misintent, but I think, you know, it's a long process, and there's a lot going on, and it's one of the things we definitely wanted Jonah to wrap back around to tonight is, okay, what does this look like in the ODE format? And then I guess this committee could decide if you want to make a specific recommendation, because the way I see, and that would be your call, I think that a presentation needs to be done at the January work session by a few people that are willing to do that out of this committee that could summarize the process, the report, the technical side, and if there's going to be specific recommendations, because there were certainly some things and some big things that were agreed upon in the group, and that to have those elements shared with the board, in my view, I'm just speaking for myself here, that I don't see anything wrong with that, because you went through a lot of work. So thank you.
If I can jump back in and piggyback on what Steve just said, I absolutely didn't mean to say that, yeah. You know, on the big points where you've reached consensus, middle school, for example, that would be helpful. I think what wouldn't be as helpful would be the strategy type recommendations in my mind. In regards to that, you're saying like what things to fix with what amount of money, like that kind of strategy, is that kind of what you're saying?
Well, I guess I would say the things that you really feel like there's the consensus on. If you're back and forth and there's a significant group that thinks, well, we should do, you know, this versus that, and I don't know if you've ever reached that kind of consensus, if you had that kind of conversation in depth, or if you've kind of gone down that road and then just backed off because, you know, it wasn't coming together. I don't know. Yeah, so I would say the middle school, the list of priorities, you know, everything that you've learned in this is really helpful to the board. I just don't know if it's helpful to come back and say, well, we think you should do a bond for this amount that should address all of these different issues, and, you know, give that level of direction. Because there's undoubtedly going to be people on this committee that aren't going to agree with that strategy as well. We're somewhat at the political standpoint here as well, and so I would just, you make a good point, Owen, about there could be some reasons for the board to change this or that, you know, whatever that might be. But I remember at some point in time in this committee, somebody made the comment, I don't know who it was, that I, as a committee member, should expect to when it comes to the bond issue, to be a promoter, to go out and help us sell it. And so my first reaction to your comment was, and I'm kind of grinning here if you can't see it, but, you know, if the board and this committee have really opposing views, that's not a good scenario for our community. Because, so the point is, this committee has really invested a lot. I'm not saying we're perfect. There's things that we may not have done correctly either, but the board needs to consider the politics.
Absolutely, I agree with you 100%. I think what we don't, personally, and I'm not speaking for the board, I'm speaking for myself, and having gone through this process before, you know, let's just say this committee adopted Tom's view, which I don't speak for you, but I think your view is we should have, from what you said earlier, very specific bond to do the middle school, you know, not do anything else, and that's the recommendation of the committee. And then in the board, maybe the board feels like we should try and do more. I think we don't want to be at odds with a committee recommendation that says do this, and then the board says, well, let's do more. And now you just create a point of contention for people that don't want to do a bond at all, to say, hey, there's this division, and that kind of thing happens. I hate to be pessimistic, but that's what we've experienced. So I think if we can,
either way, you could decide to do less and then you look back. You could
right.
decide to do more and then you look back. So I mean, I see a really valid argument for what you're saying with the board if they're going to come in and take a totally different stance than.
I don't think we'll be at odds. I mean, I don't think we'll be at like.
But I can see the leaving it a little bit loose in that sense, so that you're not looking like what you guys decide to do goes against what we recommended to do.
Right, and I think in a scenario where if the board decided to do more, Tom would probably still be an advocate and a supporter of it. He might say, well, that wasn't my first choice,
voting for the
but.
no matter what.
Right, right.
You don't have to worry about that.
I'm trying to, in listening to this conversation, I'm trying to understand, you know, some way of putting something consolidated, you know, like a 2-page statement, because it is a lot, and I want to be able to share kind of our experience so that you actually benefit from it, because anybody can put together a 1,000-page pile of data.
I mean, I think Steve kind of touched on the ability to do that. So if a few people are going to present and you can like highlight the things that really matter to everybody, and like you saying the things that people really agreed on. I mean, I think that's
so.
Well, is there some way that with whatever the laws and whatever else, can't this group come to the board maybe during a work session so we can all have a comfortable discussion instead of having this oddness that where we're going to present something and then the board maybe raises their shoulders, whereas if we're in a more informal setting where we're all here, where the board is here and we listen to you, I think that is a comfortable way of moving the conversation around and honoring what the Long Range Facilities Planning Committee has also been working and grappling with.
So
I don't know. I don't know if that's even.
Can I ask a question though too? Like, because what you're.
I don't have a comment. I have a technical question. I've got someone texting me who's been on the Long Range Committee and he wants to participate, but he's remote. Is there some way for him to do that?
Yeah, yeah, he let me know. I was gonna have to go box.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just checking. Sorry about that.
So I guess what just popped into my mind is before every meeting, I think I'm really disappointed in myself that I can't almost recite it because we saw it at every meeting, but the norms for the committee every meeting. In those norms, it says consensus, right? And it talks about that.
Right.
I don't feel like we've had a consensus vote, maybe at all, or maybe since the first night that whoever brought it up, A through F scenarios were thrown out, kind of as what we all thought was kind of let's see how this sticks. And since then, I don't know that we've had a consensus vote. And so my question is are those norms from the ODE that require for the ODE plan to have the 20-year plan, you have to have a consensus to vote for that plan? Is that just Silver Falls School District's norms? Like so when we talk about a consensus vote, I think if you went around the room right now, I don't know that we'd have a consensus vote. And so when you go back to the slide you had earlier of the blue dots we put on the paper the last time,
Yeah.
I believe there was more dots for the 130 whatever it was. So is that our consensus? Because that gets the most
We're
dollars.
gonna put those in as preferences and priorities, so they can see that, absolutely.
So then our consensus is not consensus. We're just giving them that piece of paper and saying to the board, 6 people voted for 130, 2 people voted for 60, 2 people voted for 80. Now you guys pick, or are we giving them a consensus? Or do we need to have like 3 plans that are 3 consensus plans? That's where I think a lot of us are unclear of what are we doing? What are we voting? Like, do we have to vote? How do we get the consensus?
Consensus decision-making, and we visit that at every presentation, right? That's about bringing everybody along, right? So they can see the process and understand the process, and really understand how we got to where we were. It's not about everybody agreeing to a particular item. That's not consensus.
So we did vote on the middle school, didn't we?
We did vote on the middle school.
Yeah.
You guys didn't do a vote.
Okay, I'll give you that. That
last
was,
time.
I think, the one that we all agreed on at the middle school.
Probably the
But-
only one.
But I think it's the scenarios around that. So then, when you go to the board and say, this group recommends, what are you gonna say we recommend?
You're not recommending
I mean, we
anything.
just learned we're not really making.
Well,
Here's the board's options to figure out what they wanna go forward with.
I
From
think
54 million, which is the bottom number for Brett's school, to 130 million for Fix the World. I mean, that's what it is, right?
So I still don't understand it again, like every.
I'm not trying to be critical, I'm just saying that's where we're at, right? Here's all the board's options, and they can choose whatever they want between 54 million and 130 million.
And actually, I don't want to respond just yet until we hear everybody else's comments, and then
No, that's fine.
if you don't mind.
Okay. Well, first of all, I want to commend you all on all of your hard work in this process. It's been a very long process. This is the 4th time I've been involved in a long-range facility planning process, first time in this district. And as Dave stated, typically this is a 5 to 6 month process, and all 3 other times, that's about how long it lasted. I really want to commend you all, though, because of your thoroughness and wanting to know the answers. And I think the fact that this process has taken longer, there's been so much more work put into it, I think it just stands such a much better chance of being successful. I also think that, this is step 2, and that's how I've seen it done, step 2 of a 3 phase process, in determining what type of bond and how much and so on. I think there's a lot of other work that needs to go into that, community outreach, figuring out what the community would support, et cetera. But getting this out there, I think, starts that process, so the community is aware of all these needs and all of the work that was done by this committee. If that makes sense. So.
Thank you, Lord.
So kind of like what we just have seen, tonight, even. This committee has been made up of a wide variety of people, which is really exactly the way we would want it. And we, in Silverton, we are very invested in our community, which is why we even put up a meeting here for 2 years. We get right down to it. And so even though, there's frustration or annoyance right now and some misconceived ideas of what's happening, I think we've done good work, quite frankly, and it's been a privilege to be part of this. I think it's messy. I think there's some things, not so much what is here, but just the process is kind of messy because of the amount of people and ideas and background involved. It just is, but we stuck with it. So good job. The other thing I would say is, I attended Central Howell. I taught for 2 decades up at Silvercrest, so you can kind of say I'm just kind of invested in K-8 learning, right? Okay. I think it was the last bond. They do blend together. There was a listening session that occurred, going out to the different schools. I went to one at, surprisingly, I guess, Silvercrest and Central Howell. And the listening session was turned into, we need to convince you that we need to do something with Eugene Field. That was not received at all. think you may have the ear of the K-8 community more than you ever have. Good job.
Great, thank you. Then we have one more. Daniel, I don't know if you can hear me or not. I know Peter.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Am I coming in okay?
You are. Can you hear us?
Thank you. Yeah, just to follow up, there's been a lot of good comments. And I've often said multiple times before, this is not a long-range facilities planning committee. It's what I'm learning, and I keep learning, is that it's a requirement that ODE needs to fill a report. But a long-range plan far exceeds 5 years, far exceeds 10, and it should certainly last the length of any bond. I've said that multiple times. So with that be what it is, this has actually been more about the process and not necessarily the product. So I commend the K-8 team and Scott and getting out to those listening sessions, because the process, the human dimension, is where we're going to be able to sell the bond. And that is what the Long Range Facilities Planning Committee is, in my opinion. It is the bond, because that's all we've talked about. We've only talked about bond, bond, and bond, and we haven't thought about really down the road. Again, I'm a forester. I think in years, decades, and it goes on. I'm getting some bad feedback from my mic. So anyways, I hope that makes sense. Owen, in response to having a recommendation, I agree. I also agree with Ray, but we are your champion. This team of people that has spent 2 years doing this will have more knowledge about the facilities, I believe about the process, than anyone, and no offense on the school board, unless they were on these meetings. We are your champions. We are going to sell this to the community, and we need to have buy-in. So I would disagree with the fact that you don't want to get a conflicting recommendation, because you want us all on board. So I guess that's kind of my brief comment. I've enjoyed being on it, but really we have to solve the problem, and we've got to come together. And I feel still a little, how to quite put it, but I still am confused as to why I've been on these meetings for years, because I thought we were going to make a recommendation. So, I am done. Thank you for giving me that last few minutes of the hour.
So once the board has taken this information and they create a bond committee, does the bond committee make a recommendation, or what's the outcome of the bond committee?
That's not for us to answer. That's for the district to answer.
Well, I was just kind of wondering, because like we're not giving recommendations, we're giving us some, just a report. So I was kind of wondering with the bond, what the bond would do, have a report as well.
If I start freestyling on that right now, I'm going to give some incorrect information. So
I was just trying to understand what the process was. It sounds like they probably would have something similar to what we're generating, and then the board would have to take action on it.
Well, that was kind of my question. And Owen, you were on the board, I think. Were you on in 14 or 13 when they did the first middle school go around?
Yeah, we went through it twice.
So that was kind of my question, is that, so if we have to now have a bond committee, is there a certain amount of set number of meetings the bond committee has to have to talk about that? And I mean, we're like,
like Peter said, we've had a bond committee for 2 years. Like, so it's,
We're like a short-term committee.
I mean,
No, listen, because we went for, Brett needs a new middle school, and then the upgrades, so we're like a short-term committee. The long-term committee is the next 20 to 30, which is what we started on, and then our focus went to this bond and the listening sessions and what the schools need in the short term to survive in the next 10 years. So we're more of a short-term committee that took 2 years to come together. I mean, I'm not trying to be mean, I'm just saying
that's been my feeling
we
all
don't
along.
have a 30-year plan.
I mean,
do we,
my
John?
feeling.
I mean, we never got that far.
And nor was that what we were intended to do. That was
Right,
never-
but at one time we were talking a
Yeah.
10, a 20, a 30-year projection
And to be honest,
at the beginning.
you know, so this process has been challenged at best, right? There's been district leadership changeover.
Oh, yeah.
There's been, you know, we weren't involved until the third meeting, the long-range facility planning process. So if there was promises made before we came on board,
No, I don't think there's
that
any
we're not privy to.
promises
It's not
made.
promises.
Yeah.
I think it's just, there's been a lot of confusion all the way through. I mean, when we brought it up, and we at one point stated, like, why don't we talk about the idea of go middle school, go now, go at it, keep this committee going, doing what Alan's saying to address the I'm gonna say the K5, K8. I mean, I hear K8, but when I think of K8, I also include Mark Twain, Robert Frost in that. Because really, I mean, you know, you're going through, I mean, so unless you know, had 2 or 3 rural middle schools, you were gonna say, okay, the middle school in town and the rural schools, but anything outside of that building that we know is horrible, that was 6 years ago when the plan started and we're still not anywhere, that was when we talked about, why don't we start then either a separate bond committee to start talking about that. I understand the idea of wanting to give everybody a little bit, but now I feel like we've muddied the waters even more of how much and what are we gonna do and how is the board gonna decipher through that it's gonna delay a bond even longer now to get that, you know, things addressed. And that's where I think we're all kind of like, so if we're not doing a recommendation, then what did we do? Were we warm bodies to just nod and go along with the book?
I would like to say consensus. I think the consensus is we want to pass a bond. I mean, this room is a very good, we assembled a great group of thinkers from all over the district, have different frames of thought. That's our whole school district. People are going to vote differently. We're never going to 100% agree. We just got to get to 51% for the best for our district. I am happy with the work that we've done. Yeah, it's been muddy at times, but man, we put a lot of effort in. And I think we can give the school board a lot of good information. I hope that all of us in this room, if the school board ever wants to, and I hope you guys would use us as a resource, email us, call us, and fill us in. Or not fill us in, but we could, if you guys have questions, it'd be resources still. That's where I want to end on a positive note. I didn't mean to kick the hornet's nest tonight. But I'm really grateful for this group. I'm grateful for the work we've done. And because of some of the pressing that we did, I think we got out to the K communities and did a lot of stuff. We're going to get into in-town as well. So, we're never going to be 100%, but we just got to get enough to do what's best for our kids. And, I mean, it's tough walking through some of these schools and seeing kind of the state they're in. Yeah. And I don't know, I trust the school board because I'm not smart enough to make all those decisions, nor do I want to make them. I'm ready to pass this on for me personally, and I trust Scott and I trust other people. But I guess I'm rambling. But I didn't want to discourage the group. I was hoping to leave it on a positive note, I guess.
I wanted to ask a question before, especially to the committee. Some of you came to the board in May, and you presented a statement. I believe, Tom, you did. Do you that were on that statement, do you feel that you got your questions answered? Did you feel that they were addressed now that we have gone through the summer and here we are now in the winter?
Well, I mean, I was going to say, I think that, you know, this has been an extraordinarily long, unique planning process that you've never experienced, and that is obviously going to lend to layers of confusion.
Oh.
I don't say obviously, but it obviously has, so. And, I mean, even just right back to, I don't feel like some of the concerns that I had early on, like seeing meeting minutes after meetings so that I could know what kind of information you guys were taking from these meetings, would have helped me know that we're on the same track. And I don't know where things happened, you know, somewhere in the process where minutes weren't posted to committee members until perhaps many months after that statement. I think they were all there after that.
They started to show, okay.
Yeah, but that's one of those areas where we can review what we just did. You know, instead I would watch the meetings again, which I think having the video recorded meetings helps. But the way that the meetings are presented on the video don't include all of the stuff we see on the screens, like the agenda packet. So, you know, the few times that I had the agenda packet and the meeting, then I was able to like really keep it all together.
That's it. Great. And just to circle back on, because I didn't finish my thought, and I wasn't trying to be negative in my thought. It just, the process has been challenged, right? I mean, we started in person, you know, and then we had COVID. And then we got scattered, you know, and then we tried facilitating over online, then we've come back. So I guess point being, this committee has done really good work. You know, you really have. I mean, I that's my assessment, and you know, I'm okay with being, you know, the odd man out with, you know, that assessment. But I really do think that all of you have done extraordinary work, and we have given, you know, a foundation for the board to consider, you know, a replacement of a middle school, going out and listening to the K-8 communities, really getting that feedback and having those listening sessions, and really understanding in an intrinsic way what the K-8 communities want. That's all really great work that's come out of this committee. And so I honestly feel bad, you know, and if there was a communication at some point that it was something different, you know, I don't know what else to say about that, except that.
You know, I came in late and I'm just hearing a process of, I think there's some other constraints too that I know we're trying to, and Scott, I'm going to ask you to help me out here. We have a deadline that we have to submit a report, right? And there's so I think we're trying to provide closure to a 2+ year process, even not with everything being sanguine with this committee. We have to close this process. It's the appropriate thing to do. How we go about our next steps, there's lots of options to clarify a recommendation or to develop a board decision. It is not unusual for a long-range facility plan to continually grow and live and add to it. Just like something that added some complexity was this K-8 listening session. We right at the end of the process trying to get to a deadline. So I think we're trying to balance some of those as well. Does that make some sense? I mean, literally, we have this information coming in, trying to get some closure to a process. We can think, the board could come together to decide, is there also a next step to get to that more consensus-built recommendation? But there has to be a closure to a long-range planning process.
Okay, so I think the way we're all understanding it, just correct me if I'm wrong. We're here we have the plan. This book essentially is ready to be submitted. That gets the ODE requirements done.
Not that book.
Not that book.
The plan's at the back of this for fixing it and adding in what the community suggests.
No, this is a totally separate document than the long-range facility plan.
This is
It's like an appendix.
Yeah.
So what you're saying is in the back.
This.
In the back.
Yeah.
This is the plan. This fits the ODE requirement. This is what we've done, is we've figured out the 3-phase step of what needs to happen to every building in the district.
That illustrates prioritization to comply with the requirements, but there's going to be a lot more
Yeah, there was
detail to that.
You said the school adequacies and that.
Yep, educational adequacy.
All that stuff you went in earlier, right? All
Yep.
that stuff.
All of that.
So you're putting all that together
Yep.
and bringing it to us next month, and we're gonna go, for lack of a better word, rubber stamp. We're all here, we saw it, we saw what you did. That requires ODE.
We also have to remember, I'm sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, that all of that work that we did, the educational advocacy, all of those items are everything that the committee has seen all together and participated in and worked on those priorities. So so the ODE is taking all those little pieces, all the little check boxes that we have to do. You guys have been along for the ride in working through those recommendations, to go for a bond or to build a middle school, et cetera. So don't think that the report is erroneous or whatever, it's just, oh yeah, it's a checklist. You guys have been through that process to witness all of those bits of information in a process to help guide those priorities. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but that's the deadline that you're talking about, right? That's the deadline we're up against too, is getting the ODE
Yep. Yep.
report or whatever
Because we already
done.
asked for an extension.
So I think everybody's question from here on out then is to Scott and the district, what happens next? We're done, then we sit, we don't recommend anything, we don't recommend a bond, we don't talk about a bond in the board, or do we keep going every month and keep saying, okay, I mean, like, what then happens with the board? What happens with the bond?
So in terms of this process, to come up with the plan that will be submitted to ODE and all the supplemental documentation that then the board votes on, the process would be done. However, there's all sorts of different ways to engage our community in talking about the facilities needs and all of that. I think each school district would handle that a little bit differently.
So in the end, the board gets the ODE report, and then do they get a statement from you that says this group is in consensus, we need to go for a bond? And that's it?
No, that would be the board would decide when to go for a bond. They would decide that.
So in order for us that are in this room that are concerned and want to have a bond, then we need to come to the board meetings and go up in the public comment section and say, as a member of this committee, I want you to do this now. We're not going to do that as a group out of this committee.
Sure. As a citizen in Silverton and as a stakeholder, you have every right.
I guess I just don't understand political stuff enough, but I kind of feel like you've got board members getting a recommendation from a ton of constituents that are here in the room to just say, this group of people wants you to go for a bond.
Yeah.
Why do we have to do it again? Why do we, I mean, I know you don't want us to give you we picked option 3 for this school, whatever, but like, my feeling, and I mean, maybe I'm just, again, but at this point, we need to be passing and trying to do a bond every single election cycle we can do until we get something done, because we've been sitting on our laurels. If you pull up that thing with the second phase and the first phase of the high school, that cost us almost $30 million as a district.
Colin, that's one of the reasons why we have to wrap up this process so we can get moving.
Yeah, and I'll speak for myself here on this, but so the identified problems with the buildings, the need for a middle school, to me, that's old news. I mean, you guys did a good work synthesizing, priorities and bringing all that together. But frankly, I've known that for 10 years, 10 years, 20 years, we've known a lot of that. It all means nothing unless we can get that 51%. And that's where I think this committee, in my mind, has really moved the ball forward with communities in doing that. And that's something that we missed during the last go-around. So when I look at this, just personally, I take this as a recommendation that I take it as a recommendation that the long-range committee says that we should be doing all this stuff. I mean, that's kind of the way I take it as a board member, and that then naturally means it takes money to do that. We have to go for a bond. Now, politically and strategically, we've got to decide, is it the right time to do a bond for the whole thing? Is it the right time to do this part and all that? But as far as what this group has done, the work that you've done, I think you've moved the process forward a long ways to get to that 51%. And you've really helped us just to put it all really in a package that makes sense to me and to, I think, everybody that sees it.
So I think that's where everybody needs clarification, or at least I do, and maybe again, I'm just slow on this stuff. So the recommendation's not necessarily gonna come from Scott at the end of this, that this group wants a bond. It's up to us now to get a hold of Jonathan as the chair and say, we want you guys to go for a bond.
Well, to me, it's overt as part of the report that this is what's needed for the district. I mean, maybe you're not saying the words but I don't even care if you say the words, we recommend, there's consensus that we need to go for a bond. But what I don't think would be to take the next step to start detailing what that bond looks like, when it should happen, what the amount should be.
So here's my frustration. I agree with Owen. All that stuff you pointed out, P1, P2, 3, as they've mentioned at the very beginning of the meeting, they have 8 other schools, and their long-range facility planning takes 5 to 6 months. We've spent 2 years, so yes, we pushed it forward, but why didn't we do that in 6 months? And then be working with the board to already do a bond, because we know Brett needs a school 6 years ago. We started 2 years ago. So to Colin's point, why didn't we already help the board? Yes, we're trying to get the 51%, but we could have been spending our time differently with these community meetings with Scott and all this other stuff, and this could have been sitting at ODA's desk for the last 2 years, or a year and a half. I guess I don't understand why we weren't already helping the board move Brett's new school forward, and we're worried about a roof and a toilet and all that kind of stuff that you said you knew 10 years ago, which I agree with you.
Does it take us, like, as a board, could you guys at any board meeting just say we're gonna vote to put a bond on the ballot? Like, it doesn't even have to be coming from us, right?
In theory you could, but I think
can do that whenever they want, right?
But you gotta make sure you got community support pushing you forward to help the board get it
So
to
this
accomplish
makes
it.
you feel like now as a board, you guys can do that? Because you feel like now.
I think this moved us a long ways to be able to get to that point, because keep in mind, there are gonna be a lot of people that don't want this to happen, or that are on the fence and that need to be.
So can I ask you a question? I want to ask actually both of you. I want to know, because it was kind of said tonight. It was said in this document about going to the PTCs and getting those opinions. So as a board member, and maybe, I mean, if you don't answer if you don't want to, but like if you guys get together and say, okay, let's do $80 million bond. At that point, if it does pass, is the board going to sit down with listening sessions from each one of those schools and the PTCs to say, okay, what do you want? Is there enough in here to know what you want? Or how are you going to?
It has to be lined up beforehand.
That's the thing, and that's what happened the last time. Is it was I just pulled it up and looked at it tonight. I mean, it's in there, like new roofs, new this, blah blah blah, and it went down bad.
A lot of it has to do with community.
My understanding is you have to have that in your bond
Like, we all
proposal,
understand the needs so much.
ahead of time. You can't
So
wait till
as
I got
the
80
two
million
K
to
eight,
go to the schools.
so what do you feel
I think we
like?
have to have
I mean,
that planned.
you feel like right now after those meetings, that if they come out with a 60, 70, or 80, that they're gonna just pass it because now they told you what you want and they're convinced, trust-wise, that they're gonna get that? Based on just those community meetings, or, you know what I'm saying? Like, that's what we've been talking about, is getting burnt by the trust. So how do we not get burnt again? Because
I don't know that it's gonna go,
Yeah.
it's gonna go exactly that way. I would expect that the board would, again, take it a step at a time, to where then we would probably, so don't take this as the way it's gonna happen, but I would think we would accept the report, and then that would look at the next step, which might be to go ahead and constitute a bond committee to get those details in place, and then to establish an amount, and then to put it on a ballot. We'd work together to figure out a process that was very considerate of the concerns that you just stated.
And I think that's where a lot of us felt like we were supposed to have been doing the last 2 years, so that we were ready to go to a bond. Now we're hearing potentially another year to sit down with all and hash all that out. And I think that's where a lot of us are frustrated. It's just like, how many more years are we going to keep adding to
I
this?
feel like at meeting number 6, when Steve became involved, he told us that he probably wouldn't want to run this until May or November of 2023, which was one of the things that was very frustrating for me as well. And I understand your frustration.
Well,
Well, you won't make May of 22, and you're gonna have a hard time making November of 22 if the board doesn't.
Said 23.
23.
Oh, 22. Oh, I thought you said,
Yeah.
sorry.
But yes, so there's this urgency, but there's also this,
Bureaucracy.
yeah, bureaucracy, exactly.
I mean, I was gonna say, after the momentum we generated this summer, being able to get a bond on the ballot for next May, I think would be extraordinarily valuable, but when I'm listening, when I'm hearing all the layers that are still yet to happen, I have no imagination that could possibly happen. But, I mean, just the energy that's gone with the
From the
listening
listening
sessions, and it, you know, especially if we have the K-5 listening the city school listening sessions in, you know, February and March. I mean, it would be a crystalline moment for putting a bond on the ballot.
You're gonna have to keep the momentum going, basically.
Well,
Right.
that might be
That's-
really good
that's what
advice
you're gonna
to
have to
take
do.
to the board
That's
in
gonna
the
be
form
the-
of public comment. I would recommend taking that advice to the board in the form of public comment.
That's a good point. Yeah.
All of us, each of us, we have 3 minutes apiece.
Wears out.
So we can make recommendations still that way.
And also, just really quick, will we be able to see this report at least maybe 2 days in advance of this next
Oh,
meeting?
more than that, yeah.
More than that, yeah.
Oh, good. And do we know when the next meeting is?
We just haven't said it
We
yet,
just haven't set the
but
date.
mid-January, we'll
Okay.
get the exact date and time to you.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
And will the
um,
board be able to see the report too? Oh, let me look.
I would imagine.
Yeah.
I mean, that's,
Okay.
Sure, yeah.
All right, so
Great.
I'll see you all at the February regular board meeting.
Yeah, yeah.